Hello and welcome to Pockenrop. This week's video is part 1 of 2 of my review of the year 2022. I've listened to a huge number of records this year and I've ended up with a list of a top 30. Now it's not graduated, as I often don't do that when it comes to this kind of number, where I say number 30 is this all the way down. I'm going to be looking at it in batches. This first video is going to be looking at 30 to 11. I'm going to deal with it in batches of 5 or so. Before I go in, I just remind you to like the video by hitting the thumbs up, click subscribe and the bell to receive notifications of future content. So let's start with this first batch of 5, and the first one I'm going to mention is the most recent record on here. It's currently the UK #1 album. It's Sam Ryder, There's Nothing But Spaceman. Far better than we could have possibly expect to get from a UK Eurovision entrant. Not only the great song Spaceman, but the rest of the music that's wrapped around it. This is a good pop album, and there hasn't been, in my opinion, a good Eurovision entries pop album since 1981, and you know what album that is. My next pick is by Jack White, and it's Fear of the Dawn. This album took a little while to grow on me. I've listened to it 2 or 3 times. It may grow further, but it's an interesting record. There's a lot of decent tracks on it. Heidi Ho is particularly worth checking out and is good fun. My next pick is by an artist whose albums are always solid, but rarely remarkable. It's Chris Tomlin and the album Always. This is a worship album. It's full of his trademark kind of songs, and it's a really good worship album. There's been quite a lot of Christian music I've listened to this year. Always, it's a solid 7 out of 10 by Chris Tomlin. The next one in this batch is an album that I've listened to a couple of times but doesn't grab me in the same way as its predecessor did. And this is Dawn FM by The Weeknd. It's a solid album. Like I say, it doesn't contain anything of the majesty of Blinding Lights or Save Your Tears, which are from The Hours, or from After Hours rather, which is a really, really fine album and actually smashed its way into my recent re-review of 2020. But I do quite like Dawn FM. And lastly, in this batch of 5 is Nut by KT Tunstall. This is a really solid pop rock record. I've enjoyed it the few times I've listened to it. Like I said, I've listened to so much this year, well over 60 to 70 individual records. The fact that it stood out enough for me to actually want to listen to it a second or third time is what gets it this place in my top 30. So Nut by KT Tunstall is the last of this little batch of 5. And it's time, therefore, for one of my Pockenrop awards. It's going to be fairly simple and a quick award. It's Reissue of the Year. And from my view, there hasn't been a huge amount of reissues that I've been interested in. Now, the first one that springs to mind is the complete set of Use Your Illusion. I really like both double albums, but what I'm not that fussed about is hearing a bunch of live stuff. So, whilst the fact that Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 are now much more widely available on vinyl is a good thing, but it doesn't win them the prize for Reissue of the Year. But my actual Reissue of the Year is the Revolver box set by the Beatles with the remix by Giles Martin, which he was able to do as a result of the separation software miracle that has been developed by Peter Jackson, who did the Get Back documentary. So if you're not aware, this is a 4 vinyl box set that contains the remix by Giles Martin on 1 disc. There is 2 discs worth of session material, one of which contains the demo of Yellow Submarine, which basically blows everything we thought we knew about the Beatles and their songwriting out of the water. It turns out it was predominantly a Lennon song. And then there is a straight repress from the original masters of the mono version. There is then a book, and then there is an EP version of the single. I haven't bought it because for me, £170 is just more than I'm willing to pay for a box set. I'm waiting for it to come down in price to where I will be happy, which will be roughly commensurate with how much I paid for the Let It Be box set, which was phenomenal. But the reissue of the year, it is Revolver. Moving now into my next batch of 5, and the first one in this batch, I'd rate these ever so slightly higher than just 7 out of 10. These are maybe 7.1 or 7.2 out of 10. Diamond Star Halos by Def Leppard. Big surprise, this record. It's one of the best comebacks you come across. It sounds just like you imagine a Def Leppard record should sound like. I believe Classic Rock gave it its album of the year. Really good record, Diamond Star Halos. My next pick, and I fully expect that this will go up the more I listen to it, Zach Williams, 100 Highways. This is a Christian artist who released southern rock style stuff. This scratches my third day itch, which I've talked about several times, but with that twang of extra country involved. Zach Williams, 100 Highways, really fine record. And a potential contender for surprise of the year is this next entry, and it is Half Man, Half Biscuit, The Voltarol Years. This is a really fine Half Man, Half Biscuit album, and if you've listened to anything by them before, you'll know what you're letting yourself in for. Very clever lyrics with pop culture references, left, right, and centre, and a post-punk sensibility that you can tell that when it comes down to it, Nigel Blackwell, when he's one of the best lyricists in this country, but he doesn't really care. He enjoys what he does, but he's not in this for the money. And there'll be more mentioned about Half Man, Half Biscuit a little bit later on. The next pick from this batch of 5 is an album that I think is probably more touching than most of the other records I've got here. It is Life After Death by Toby Mac. So Toby Mac, or Toby McKeon, was 1/3 of DC Talk, and he's had a very successful Christian artist solo career as a rock rapper, and on all of his records his son Truett used to appear and do a tiny little bit. Well, Truett died at the age of 21, and this album works as the first thing that Toby Mac has recorded since. It's achingly sad in places, as you know. This is about a man coming to terms with the death of his son, and it's both full of hope that there is life after death, but it's still achingly sad. Life After Death by Toby Mac. And the last in this batch of 5 is an album that I know every time I put it on I'm going to enjoy, but it kind of tends to fall into the category of very similar to everything else they've done. It is NK Pop by Paul Heaton and Jackie Abbott. Paul Heaton is another of the greatest lyricists that we've got, but you can't help when you start listening to Paul Heaton songs, he has this tendency to drop definite articles in his lyrics, to take them away. And once you know that, you start to hear it every time. And it becomes a little bit, if I'm honest, tiresome. NK Pop is a fine Jackie Abbott, Paul Heaton record, but it's so similar to the others. It's why it's in this list, because it's good, but it's where it is because it doesn't stand out from the rest of the stuff they've done. So now another Pockenrop award, and it's for the biggest disappointment of the year. So the 4 nominations. The first is Paul McCartney. And why is it a disappointment? Simply because we haven't had an archive. It's a gripe. I was really looking forward to maybe hearing London Town properly mastered, or Back to the Egg, or maybe even Press to Play. Something from the archive collection, particularly as there was something in the programme for the tour of the Got Back tour, which culminated with his triumph at Glastonbury, that said that the archive collection was carrying on and there was stuff coming. We haven't had it. Disappointment number 1. The next 3 are all albums. The first, Tears for Fears, The Tipping Point. I was really looking forward to this, mainly because I really like The Hurting and Songs from the Big Chair and Sowing the Seeds of Love. This felt like it might be the next in that great run. It was fine. It's not in my list because it was just fine and nothing phenomenal. The next is Midpoint by Tom Chaplin. Keane were fantastic when I saw them live this summer. One of my real highlights. I love the music of Keane. I love Tom Chaplin's vocals, but his solo album was meh. And the last nominee is Taylor Swift for Midnights. Now, after the brilliance that was Folklore and Evermore, plus the re-recorded Fearless and Red, my hopes were sky high for Midnights, and it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. And I wanted to like it, and like it more, in fact. But I didn't. And the winner, therefore, is Tom Chaplin's Midpoint. That was probably the most disappointing thing that I've listened to, where my expectations were sky high. So into the next batch, and I'm going to do this next batch as 10 records. And the first is also my Pockenrop Award winner for Debut of the Year and Best New Find. It is Wet Leg by Wet Leg. First time I heard this, I really didn't like it. But my colleague, who crops up in these videos from time to time, said that it was one of the best albums of his year, so I decided to give it a go. I don't think it's ever going to rise to the echelons of an absolute favourite, but I found myself enjoying it a lot more on the second listen. They don't care. They're having a good time. They're making fun songs, and Chaise Longue is ridiculous. It's a really enjoyable album. Wet Leg by Wet Leg. The next album almost made it onto my potential for disappointments of the year, but I've got a feeling the more I listen to it, it's going to change, and that is Growing Up by Luke Combs. This is an artist I discovered at the start of the year when I started to branch out a little bit as a result of listening to Eric Church, and this new record came out this year. He's a country rock artist, and I really enjoy his previous 2 records. I like this one. It may grow on me, but it's here in the top 20 region. Next in this batch is an album that I'm keen to listen back to their back catalogue. So this is not New Artist of the Year, but it's possibly Discovery of the Year. And this is Blossoms with Ribbon Around the Bomb. I liked it enough that when I saw it at a really good price on a certain online retailer, I jumped in and bought it. I think this album is going to grow on me in terms of the fact that it's very 90s indie / 80s pop, and I like that kind of thing. I am keen to listen to their back catalogue and find out what I've been missing all these years. Ribbon Around the Bomb by the Blossoms. Next pick in this is a bit of another potential surprise album, something I didn't think I was going to like as much as I did. It's the Proclaimers and Dentures Out. At one point, this was in my top 10. So we're getting into stuff that I really like. I listened to it a second time, and whilst the lyrics are very, very clever, there was a certain sameness to it as you listen through it. And if I'm honest, their vocal style does tend to grate a little bit after a lot of it. But Dentures Out is a very cleverly written, sharply observed record by the Proclaimers. Some really gem tracks on here. Things like Sundays by John Calvin and Praise. Praise is a particularly good song. And the title track, Dentures Out. Next pick on this list has already come up on my video already, and it's Midnights by Taylor Swift. Yes, I know it was in the category for biggest disappointment. Like I said, I wanted to like it more than I did, but there are songs on here that are genuinely in the category of being phenomenally good songs. I just think the rest of the material around it lets it down. It reminds me too much of Reputation, which of all the Taylor Swift albums that I've listened to is my least favourite. Next we come to an artist who I want to hear more of, and we'll be going back into their back catalogue to see what's lurking in there. It's Maren Morris and it's Humble Quest. I started listening to it. I thought this is kind of like pop. Then the next track was really country, and then she's pop, and then she's country. And Humble Quest was actually a surprisingly enjoyable listen. I've only listened to it through the once. Whether or not it will stay roughly where it is here now, we'll wait and see. The next album is We the Kingdom. Their debut, Holy Water, is one of my favourite albums of the year 2020. This is the follow-up. It's self-titled. It's more of the same. And I think it's an album that will grow on me in time, but ultimately I don't think it quite nudges the heights of Holy Water. But We the Kingdom, by We the Kingdom, good album. The next album you cannot physically purchase, and it's One by Halfway Down. You can only purchase this over Spotify or Amazon, etc. The reason I even know about it is, full disclosure, Halfway Down is one of my closest friends. And this album, it's a collection of 10 songs that he's written himself. And I really, really admire the fact that he's done it. It's all entirely self-played, self-produced, self-recorded. One by Halfway Down is worth you checking out on Spotify. The next album is by another Christian artist, and it's Brooke Ligertwood and Seven. So Brooke Ligertwood is best known for writing songs like Hosanna and What a Beautiful Name. This is a live recording of new songs, some of which are truly brilliant. Ancient Gates, which kicks the record off, I think is fantastic. Honey from the Rock is absolutely excellent. My wife's particular favourite on here is a track called Nineveh. And Seven by Brooke Ligertwood. Seven by Brooke Ligertwood. And lastly, from this batch of 10 is Jacob Bryant and Barstool Preacher. So Jacob Bryant is another country rock artist. Scratches that itch that I keep mentioning. And Barstool Preacher is a unashamedly southern country album with that great rock inflection. The opening track alone is worth the admission fee, which is called Well Whiskey Discount Cigarettes. And one of my favourite tracks of the year by some distance. But there are other great tracks on here like Baptised in the River. It's a really enjoyable listen. Barstool Preacher by Jacob Bryant. To conclude this video, I'm just going to run through the contenders for my Song of the Year. There's 15 or 17 tracks on here, I can't remember exactly how many, and you can hear almost all of them on a big Spotify list that I've made, which will be available in the link in the description. The first is Compliance by Muse, Taking Me Back Gently by Jack White, Pretty Soon by The Fizz, the only one that you'll not get on Spotify, that. Anyone for You by George Ezra, Ancient Gate by Brooke Ligertwood, Well Whiskey, which I mentioned earlier, by Jacob Bryant, Agatha Bell by Colin Hay, Midnight Mass Murder by Half Man Half Biscuit, Diamond in the Dark by Liam Gallagher, The Difference by Elvis Costello and the Imposters, The World That Was by The Proclaimers, Second Opinions by Casting Crowns, You Have What It Takes by Aha, Maroon by Taylor Swift, Scars in Heaven by Casting Crowns, Bam Bam by Camila Cabello, Face It Alone from Queen, and Smells Like Me by Charlie Puth. As I've said, there's a link in the description to a Spotify playlist that contains all these tracks and more. I'll be back in a week with another video, but until then, remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll see you with part 2 of this in a week. Thanks for watching.